everybody, and I'm excited to welcome back William Malek, who did an outstanding job on one of my first episodes of Between the Lines, and he's back for a second time, this time for a deep dive into why transform. And this is designed for C-level executives and boards to really get into why should they be transforming the businesses that they're in. William, welcome.
Hello, Haig. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, your first podcast was a great hit, and transformation, disruption, the importance of future thinking, what key actions executives should take. These are all top of mind right now, especially now that we're kind of seeing an emergence out of COVID, and it's really want to find out what's going to separate the people who are going to get ahead of the pack. And so this discussion is really just to jump into a few of those points. So where do we start? Why transform?
I mean, so yeah, it's just really the fundamental question of the hour, right? So unfortunately, we see COVID forcing us now to really come to grips with what's happening. And I think we have to thank COVID, quite honestly, as a humanity, even though there's catastrophe happening. And I realize that that's a serious and sad part of this. But what it's done, it showed where we have serious systemic problems. Just look at the healthcare systems, look at the challenges of the breakdown of just having hospital beds. And here where I'm at in Bangkok right now, we are literally living a third wave where the first two, we had like maybe no more than 90 people over the last year and a half. And now it's hit again, and it's so severe that it's got everything even more locked down again, and hospital beds are becoming scarce. And what do we do? But this is just, I think, a metaphor. The COVID is a metaphor for what else has been going on in society. We have a bifurcation happening with wealth. And we can see who's gotten rich. You just look at the companies that have, brought in the dough, and they're not the ma and pa shops. The ma and pa shops are suffering the most. And you see the tech companies just loading in the cash to come in because of the nature of the problem, the access they have with what they're doing with platform technology, et cetera. My argument is, if we don't begin to understand the systemic challenges that COVID is revealing to us in the business context, not in a health context, but in a business context, of the implications to be far more agile, to be far more, what they say, anti-fragile, if you would, that the decisions that are coming from the CEO and the boards now, and I say boards in particular because they're getting sucked into this, because the strategic planning folks have said, you know what, this wasn't even on our radar. This was not even close to being planned as far as an event goes, that we would have strategic plans developed for scenarios that are, to deal with the kind of things that we're seeing now. So my position is that we can now begin to have an honest, direct conversation that the shifts that are going to occur and are already occurring are critical to understand the speed of change, right? And I think it's that quote by Jack Welch said, if the rate of change outside of you is greater than the rate of change on the inside, your day is, the end is near, right? So anyway, it's an issue of speed. And I think that not being conscious of just literally the systemic changes that we're going to see in front of us.
Hey, William, I want to just go back to the magic word you said there, which is boards, because I work with a lot of CEOs, and obviously the boards have a lot of decision power in terms of how companies can change and the speed of rate of change, right? But there's boards and there's boards, right? So there's different types of boards. I want you just to share in your mind, again, if I'm a CEO of a company, how do I know if I've got a strategic board? And if they're not strategic, what do I do? Just maybe talk a little about the types of boards, because that's really important right now.
Yeah, so as you can imagine, so I sit on 3 boards right now myself. They're all different. I sit on one board that I would call friends of the family, if you would. And my role there is to add advisory capacity maybe 2 times a year. And I'm kind of being directed as far as what's happening. Now, the good news is that I have confidence in the competency of the CEO and the company, that he's very good at outlining, how we're going to make money, what the key decisions are, systemically of running an organization. And then there are boards where, the boards are actually active. They're on operational committees within the organization, helping guide and mentor and touch other folks that appreciate, that information in terms of guiding them in terms of how they plan and execute their work. So again, the range is quite large in terms of the types of boards, especially when it comes to strategic decision making. But let's be clear, most boards have at least one representative called the CEO or the chairman that are accountable at the end of the day for taking the mandate and have the fiduciary responsibility of taking the plans or the conversations of the board and to put those into action in the organization. So to a large degree, we talk about boards as kind of this big, powerful thing, but at the end of the day, it's usually a group of small people who really should have their hands on the dial, if you would, in terms of the organization to realize what needs to be done and how. So this is a fairly significant moment that we have, that if you don't have a board who has that strategic understanding about how to run a business, when there is no chance that you can be doing any more predictive analysis on, a 10-year financial scenario because your markets are dropping out in front of you. Or even worse, I think it was 60 Minutes last weekend said, you know what, we've got a supply chain disruption coming that's huge. And they went into, where are all these chips coming from? We have huge manufacturers shutting down now because they can't get the chips. And it turns out that this whole chip thing has now been consolidated to a very small group of companies. And imagine if you can't get basic technology, it's kind of like we've shifted from oil being the critical resource to now it's technology chips. So you've got to have an understanding. Somebody has to be recognizing how we have to start dealing with a world of not predictability, but uncertainty. And how do we frame conversations strategically to allow better decisions about how to manage this ability to be more agile in responding and responding effectively. You just, responding to respond is not there. Listen, we have to do this effectively.
I love what you're saying, and it's just so valuable to our audience today. I know we both love Peter Drucker, so one of the quotes I know that you use a lot is, the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence itself, but to act with yesterday's logic. And I want to take that quote into my next question, which is really understanding what separates future-ready companies from the pack. And I know you work with one or two of these top companies that do that, but what's yesterday's logic to lose, and what makes these companies future-ready?
Yeah, so future-ready. Imagine, so the word future, right? We think it's out there. We think that if we plan something today, we hopefully in the future will see an outcome of A, B, and C, right? But the reality is what we do today is the biggest predictor of our future today, right? And there are futurists that would argue that kind of metaphysically that there is no such thing as a future. All there is the current moment in terms of what you're doing. I used to get calls from CEOs, and they said, well, we're going to bring you in and we want you to help us really form our strategy, really help us understand how we're going to execute this, et cetera. And they said, would you like to see our strategic plan? And I said, no, I don't want to see. But what I do want to see is what's your investment strategy on the projects you're going to do? Because that would tell me much more clearly as to what they intend to do. Now, in today's world, even that's problematic. So, for example, I've had strategic planners come to me now and said, you know what, we had a 5-year plan and developed by, the top big management consulting houses, which I will not name at this point. And they said, you know what, we've thrown that out the door. It's out the door. We have no ability to really predict now what we have to do. So we have to come back and do new resource planning. So this orientation to recognizing what do we do, right? What fundamental shifts are we going to have to do with planning? Now, I'm going to sound very controversial, but I'm going to share with you that the answer is not as evident as it might be. We have to let go of planning. And what do I mean by that? Well, what we can see now is that some of the organizations, and you have to just think of companies that have to move fast, and what they do is strategy emerges as a result of the people that are making decisions about what needs to happen. So if you let go of planning, what it implies is You have to get the organization engaged to really figure out what needs to be done to maintain customers, paying customers, and how do we actually manage our liquidity and our cash flow to grow the business. So the challenge here is that we have to get closer to the people that are actually engaged in the actual work, and more importantly, those that are customer focused, those that are talking to the customers, those that are looking at the customer data, whether it's customer service, whether it's your salespeople, your marketing people. But there's a contingent of people who are deeply into understanding what the nature is right now of some of these customers. My position is, in times of flux and change, they have to be really engaged in helping the organizations understand what to do. Not 5 people sitting on a board who are not in the business, running the business, not talking to customers, but they're looking at, what I call analytic decks from various consultants. You have to shift the orientation. So the idea is that strategy, planning, future fit organizations, how I have to look at today in order to survive, but you have to plan your way through to a point of sustainability. So future fit companies, for me, are ones that are decentralizing so that the speed of decision can be much more understood in terms of the impact that are required to deal with these gaps that are happening. So you've got hotels right now today, article yesterday in Thailand, 20% of the economy is in fact hospitality related. And it was announced that today, because of the third wave of COVID, that 50% of the hotelers only have 3 months of liquidity left. Okay. This is just stunning. So right now, I can tell you what they're doing is they're trying to figure out, what are we going to do? You've got less than 3 months, right? So usually, plans take a lot longer to deal with, but now they're huddling. And guess what happens? In the time of crisis, we've seen studies of this over and over in business and organizations, that when there is a crisis, and it really is, life and death type of thing, which the first thing you do is you flatten structure. You flatten it. You literally cut out all the management layers you've got of who's reporting to who, and you put them in a room and you go for it because you have no time left. And by doing that, you begin to collectively see an intelligence or an emergence of discussion that really is far more powerful than 3 or 4 people sitting on a board trying to guess, what should we do here? Or using consulting input, which is usually some of the challenge they get into, and following those leads. I say, use your employees, use the people that are in your system to inform you about how to look at what is today and how they see the future, because those are the people that are doing the work for you. So I could go on more, but I just want to make that first point is, are you capable of running a flat organization?
Yes, exactly. Are you capable of running a flat organization? And then at the same time, we covered boards, and we said earlier that we need a strategic board as well, but the strategic board is doing a different function than it would have done maybe 5 years ago, because the people nearest the customer are the most important right now, and you have to flatten the organization to do that. So what holds back people from, I guess, flattening their organizations? And do you have examples of companies that have really done that very well?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I'll just make one more comment to come back to this, which I think is important that you just brought up. It's not that the board doesn't have a role. Their role is far more strategic now, because based on the actions or based on the initiatives that are required to sustain that business, that are coming from the people that are executing, that really understand what the customers are wanting and what they're doing and so forth. The board has a strategic domain now, because they have to design a system that allows those people to carry out the work. And it may be new work, it may be new products and services. So they do need to be actively involved strategically now in what I say, managing and planning the systems that the people are in. And arguably, without that, you have chaos. You don't have connection. You don't have coordination, whether it's data, information. I could go on and on. How you move and moving fast, right? So there's an entire unlearning that needs to occur for boards to recognize they have a strategic, significant role in dealing with the structure and what I call the organizational systems moving forward. Now, the company that I've been involved with, and some of you know this already, Hagen, you know this as well, that I have an innovation management research center that is fully engrossed in the conversation on how does the higher business model actually work. So I'm studying this at very deep levels. We have companies that are embedding this in their organization and so forth. And the basic premise of higher is a Chinese company. It is operating on what we call self-organizing autonomous teams. Interesting. Autonomous, really autonomous. So these teams are not told what to do. They are not being directed. They are developing the strategy. And those strategies inform this kind of living organization and living system, allowing the system to grow, but they're highly accountable for producing the value, and they're reporting to the customer. You will hear Chairman Zhang Rumin will tell his employees, you don't report to me, you don't report to a boss. Your boss is your customer, and you must fundamentally make that mind shift. Well, guess what? This, to a large degree, for highly successful entrepreneurs, this is the mindset that is core. It is a core kernel, if you would, in the DNA. Because if you don't recognize that the people that pay your salary is your customer, not your boss, this is a fundamental shift that in the corporate world, we really do need to understand how to look and frame that kind of conversation for flattening the organization, but doing it in a concerted, coherent way that still allows for the organization to deal with the challenges in the market, deal with the products and service, and do it quickly.
That's amazing. And this process is called Ren High. That high uses, is that right?
Yeah. So Ren High is a play on some Chinese characters, you know, and probably the most important one of Ren High is Ren, the very first word, which is it's about humanity. It's about people. And one of the things that I truly appreciate and can take, and I'm privileged to have the ability to work with Higher, okay? And by the way, 20 years ago, I would have never said that. I can tell you, teaching at Stanford, we would never, ever have thought to go to China to benchmark and research a Chinese company to talk about advanced, highly effective management models. Right. We didn't do it. In fact, they would come to us. I remember very clearly sitting down with the entire executive management team plus below them from China Mobile. And they brought their whole team over because coming to Stanford, right, the school of, full of innovation and stuff. And they really took it in. But essentially, we were teaching what I called the traditional management model at that time, that stuff flows from the top and the boss does this, and and reinforcing kind of, if you would, the orientation to top-down management. And of course, they took it and went off with it. And now here we find ourselves looking at a Chinese benchmark as being one of the world's potential most advanced companies, and not just talking about it, but demonstrating through financial performance how powerful this orientation is to be decentralized, to be agile, to be autonomous. It is stunning to see this. So again, I'm pleased to be sharing this stuff with you, but the humane part of this is about you as an individual are important. And what Chairman Zhang likes to talk about is my job, and this system is here to unleash the innate talent and the innate human potential of the people that come to this system, to this organization. And interestingly, while we talk about this, that our employees are the most important asset, we've been hearing that nonsense for the last 20 years. I almost gag when I hear HROD people say, oh yeah, well, our employees are the most important asset, and then we punch them into these monolithic, incredibly rigid systems. and say, oh, well, we love you, we want to take care of you, and then we burn them out, right? And you look at the Gallup, you look at the Gallup data, it gets worse every year and it's getting worse. And one of the challenges is people are disengaged. I think it was Steve Jobs says, you hire people, you hire the smartest people, well, don't hire them and then tell them what to do, right? That's not what a good leader does. So at Hire, they've attempted to try to really understand the optimization of human value creation. And that's both with the people that are in the company as well as the customer. And this is why you see this focus on, it's not about your boss, it's about you and your customer. And how do you relate to the customer? How do you build lifetime value? Not a product transaction, not a transactional strategy, but how do you build value that they will want to be with you their entire journey? And this is a strategic major shift going on now that we see in the business. We call this the experience economy, and books are being written about it, et cetera. And if you're not in the experience economy, I can tell you, I think the prophets of doom will tell you, if you don't know what ecosystem you're in trouble.
This is great information, and it's like drinking from a fire hose. So I think we're going to have a quick meditation minute. Take a deep breath, quick Om as you're out there in Bangkok. And I want to challenge you on a couple of questions here. You mentioned the humanities side, and I know a lot about Ren High. One of the things I love talking about is the ecosystem. And then in terms of the ecosystem, again, that involves people and relationships. And then the second part of the human side for me is, again, I'm a CEO of a company, and I've got a leadership team, right, which is made up of human beings. And again, how do I align that leadership team to be able to implement this? But I think there's a leadership role both on the ecosystem side and in terms of my own leadership team. As a CEO listening to you now, or a board, how do I address the changes I need to make to what I've got here, the cards on the table?
So what I don't want to do, let me tell you what you don't want to do. You don't want to establish a change initiative or transformation initiative that says, we're going to go on this journey and we're going to do the whole thing. And we have the answer, we know what the formula is, and we're going to impose it, make the changes and move on. What I think we need to recognize, again, back to uncertainty about how things are emerging. Think about think about systems that are naturally evolving, right? And we look at nature for examples of this. What I need to recognize is we need to start doing experiments fast. And the best way to formulate what you need to do is with your people, with direction and guidance, if you would, to allow experiments to start happening. And they said, okay, let's test a hypothesis. Let's test an assumption that if we do have a small micro enterprise team that's focused in this area, let's let them do that, carve out a space within the system, recognize what we have to do to protect them, allow them to experience it, and then measure the performance. Because at the end of the day, what the board's going to ask the CEO, show me the money, show me the performance. Did this really do what it suggested it would do in the beginning? And so this notion of adapt, adopt, right, that you'll see in Ren High, the concept that everything is emergent, life is emergent, nature is emergent. It's informing us as it's coming up. It just happens to be coming up fairly fast now. If you look at potentially at the climate issue and the water rising and so forth in Bangkok, we have a major problem coming. The question is, can we see it enough in order to respond? But it's an emergent phenomenon. We have to learn from it as it emerges. And that is best done by not going in what the answer is or what the final destination is, but start a journey of change through experimentation. And this fundamentally is the beginning piece that we can look at. And there's other companies that are beginning to model, if you would, Hire's Ren High, Fujitsu in Europe has started doing exactly this. Small teams, let's test this assumption out. And what they're finding out, they're seeing the performance, and then that gives them more confidence, and they get information back to their executives saying, yeah, this is working. And it's funny, we let go of decision making, gave it to the teams because they're autonomous, and they're getting more performance than they ever have, right? So it kind of breaks down what we would see that we have to unlearn, that we think that it's the boss or the leader, the CEO, the board that has the answers to the issues in the business today. And that is in fact humane. It's saying, look, it's why I might be smart, I might understand things. What's more important is, what are my employees doing? Do they believe in it? Are they engaged in the strategy? Are they passionate about, delivering value to the customer? Because if you don't have that, you can imagine the consequence at the end of the day over time. So to me, there's a lot that deals with how do we approach engaging the human element in this approach for the transformation. And the short answer, start an experiment. Small teams, protect them, have executive sponsorship so that they don't get derailed from it, and allow them to demonstrate to the organization what works and what will not in their context, in their specific idiosyncratic context.
This kind of reminds me of, every 10 years we get these things that kind of reset everything. I mean, we had lean thinking in the 90s, right? The 2000 with the dot-com boom, just this ability to start new companies. And I think, so is it like every 10 years, we get a sprint, and then the last 5 years we get lazy again, and then there's kind of a recreation. This time it's Ren High, but it is back to autonomous teams, whether it was through incubators in 2000 or lean thinking groups who were allowed to fail. Part of it is this kind of new way of allowing people to fail maybe and giving them the autonomy. It's absolutely fascinating. And so you and I guess, as advisors to a lot of these companies, in a transformation kind of consulting role, do you think our role is changing? One of my favorite pieces of feedback I got from a client was, Haig has continuously, he was telling the CEO, Haig has continuously pushed us out of our comfort zone over the last decade. And I know that's exactly what you've been doing with your clients for 20 plus years, 30 plus years. So do you think that role for us is changing? And I guess the question another way is, how can we support these C-level executives, executive teams and boards move in the direction that you've been talking about, consulting?
Yeah, it's a great point. And I would say, if the shoe fits, wear it. So if we're saying, okay, by the way, if you should self-organize and get this thing happening, it's no longer about your knowledge as the external consultant.
Right.
Our role shifts to, how do we help the team define the information that it knows, the ambition that it has? Where do they want to go? Allowing for what I call the collective intelligence of the group, which is far superior than one individual thinking they got the answer when there's so many variables, fluctuating in the market or with the customers. So imagine a facilitation approach. Imagine that the real skill is being able to know what questions, not answers, not go do this, or McKinsey says that, or whatever. It's to allow the questions to be placed in the right order at the right time.
Right.
I will never forget, I went to a conference, this was only 25 years ago, or 30, it could have even been, it was in the mid 90s, and Peter Senge was at it. It was in downtown San Francisco. And, it was this notion that the act of transformation is having the right question at the right time. I have never forgot that. And at the moment when he said this, it was just like an explosion going, damn, I think he's right, because it was just, if you think about this, because it's through the question by which the answer comes, but it's the answer that the team is bringing up, not you, the expert, not you, you've been in, expert. You and I've been doing expert level consultation on, systems and strategies and so forth. And my big unlearning in the last 2 years since COVID started, and you know this, Haig, because we've been talking a lot along the way, I have had to unlearn. And unlearning isn't just like, oh, switch on, switch off. Unlearning in our world is critical, because we now have to have a different set of competencies to allow these conversations to occur with very high intensity on the strategy and what to do and how to move forward and so forth. And yes, our knowledge still matters. It's part of our past, but moving into the future, if we recognize this engagement of emergent knowledge, emergent strategy, we have to take a different role.
Got it. So I like what you talk about unlearning. So in terms of, again, C-level execs and boards, I guess what what's an easy place for the next board meeting to start to say what should we be unlearning now? What are the kinds of buckets that they should be looking at?
So every organization is going to be different, Haig. And literally, I just had this conversation this morning. I'm about to enter into a fairly large organization. They want to know about Ren High because it's out there. They found out about it. They did a little bit of research, and now they're really serious about this. And they want me to come to a meeting and talk about it. And I said, no, but what I really need to know is if you can share with me ahead of time, what are the 5 biggest challenges you see right now? Okay, right now, today, not 10 years into the future, but what is it that they are concerned about? So from that standpoint, right, every single organization, and this is part of this notion, it's kind of Taoistic, if you would, that in the moment, the information required is contingent upon what the situation is. What is they say the context, right? So everything is context. And so for me, again, back to that skill set to say what is important for the moment, I've got to have my questions right. I've got to allow through the questioning process to bring out that informative understanding that belongs to this organization. It isn't me. I'm coming from the outside. No, I'm pushing, though. I'm not just letting them go, but through my questions, I'm forcing a deep and richer understanding as to how do they see the world. And this is actually one of the first parts, I think, of transformation is what is the worldview of the leader, of the board? And part of my conversations are, what is your worldview? Is your worldview that we continue to extract resources with a zero-sum gain in the marketplace? And this is the big, in London, there's a huge movement on stakeholder capitalism. And the challenge is that we have to understand in order to move towards a stakeholder, which is much more holistic. It's much more, if you would, systemic. It includes how do we truly be sustainable and not, I'm talking about making donations to, Greenpeace or things like this. I'm talking about truly making a difference in our business models. So underpinning this disruption that we're going through, I personally believe that there is a moment now where all the conditions, the macroeconomics are pointing to us that we have to fundamentally think through how are we going to stop the level of degradation that's going on with health, with populations, with food. So you can just go on and on with this as far as where all this is coming from. So I'm hopeful that the beginning conversation is to really find out what is the ambition. Right. Because here's the deal. If the ambition is we just want to continue to do what we're doing, we're going to do the value extraction model of resources, we're a zero-sum gain. Honestly, it's good, but it's not the kind of clients that I would work with right now. I'm really, engaged. My purpose is to figure out how do we help change the system through this powerful, approach to realizing that we can create a future that we do want. But that has to be intention and it has to be committed to, but you have to believe in it. And if my ambition is not to change that, then as they say, you will always get what you've always done and it will continue to be a pattern, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely agree with all of that. I want to just go back and actually we're wrapping up now. And I think one of the most important points you made was being close to the customer right now. So a lot of companies, a lot of entrepreneurs, large organizations, divisions have a job to do right now to understand the future. Now, you kind of humorously said, not really strategic planning, but obviously there is strategic planning in a different context. But I want to just try and finish up with the concept again. If I'm running my company or if I'm a board, use this phrase, zero distance to the customer. As being the key to organizational agility. So zero distance to the customer. Again, how as a strategic board member do I push my CEO to really understand that there is very little distance between him and the customer, and he doesn't have one of these expanded hierarchies that has 6 months to get information up to the top, and that really my board meeting is giving me the real data with zero distance to the customer.
Yeah, so this is a major concept within the Ren High system, is this notion of zero distance. And it's kind of, again, it's kind of it's an abstract element, but maybe let me give you an example of this to kind of just give a sense here as we are getting to the end of our conversation. Zero distance is about being conscious and aware of what are the needs and the unmet needs of your customers. All right, we're in business. We're in to make, a buck, if you would. We have to recognize that if we don't satisfy those needs, those customers are going to either not purchase our product or will not purchase our product again. Yes. This is extremely important. And maybe I'll give you one example. I was going to give you I can give you two examples, but maybe I'll give you one just for short notice. GE Appliance, I think, had one of the best years this year in 35 years. And this is during the COVID crisis. This is really to be this is quite amazing when you think about it. And they're an appliance. They don't even acknowledge that they're an appliance company because they believe that they're an ecosystem company now. Their brand is about ecosystems and experiences, right? But imagine this, a company that for the last 10 years has been growing at 20% compounded annually. Okay, for you mathematicians, think about this. Today is around a $40 billion company. For the last 10 years, growing at 20% compounded annually. This is extraordinary. In other words, if you have a 20% compounded growth, you are growing what they say in traditional strategy, you're growing the top line. But growing the top line has a cost to it. This is what we have figured out. But the beauty in the Ren High system, because it is not a zero-sum game economic strategy, it is a win-win strategy. So the partners that Higher has together, it's about how do we co-create, co-share, where everybody wins, and more importantly, the customer gets the value. So you can imagine that the investment of assets or the infrastructure that's required for some of these new services, it is shared. So Higher doesn't have to make those investments and have the cost of goods high enough so it's eroding margins, and I'll give you one example of this, just really important. Last May here in Thailand, Higher worked out an experience service for people who had never had air conditioning before. And if you've been to Thailand, and I think you have, you know how hot it gets. I mean, 40 degrees C at 90% humidity. It's stunningly hot. You're just dying to find a place for air conditioning, right? So in Thailand, they found there was an unmet need for people who could not afford to buy air conditioners. So they figured out, you know what? They went out and did their homework. They did their customer work. They found out there was zero distance. And what they found out was these farmers would like to have air conditioning, but they couldn't get a loan because they don't have the credit. Their payment is not consistent because farming goes up and down. It's seasonal. And when their cash comes in, it's irregular. So having a loan, they can't even pay it off or maybe even pay the electric bill in some cases. And what they did is they found out, that farmers, if there was no upfront investment required, and if they could only pay for what they use, they figured out at 4 baht an hour, which is about 10 to 13 cents, depending on the conversion rate, they could afford, quote unquote, the luxury of having air conditioning. But here's what it required. That solution to that problem required Higher to cooperate with the largest local telecom company called AIS, because they had the interconnectivity through cellular abilities. And Higher would put in the IoT sensor into the air conditioner, which would transmit the data on exactly what the actual usage is. And that information gets ported into the bank, the largest bank, one of the largest banks in Thailand, SCB, and the bank then sends a monthly bill for the actual usage, and the farmer pays for it on his app, sitting in his rice field, if you would, out in the middle of nowhere. And the point being that Higher didn't have to go invest in the network interconnective connectivity. They partnered with AIS. They partnered with a bank to get the infrastructure required to have this solution make sense, be practical, and deal with the target market that had never been served before. We're back to humanity. Remember? We're back to humanity. And everybody won. The customer won. the partners in the ecosystem one, and now it partially suggests to you how they can grow at 20% compounded and also have a net profit of just significant benchmark, much different than many other companies, simply because of how they do business ecosystem strategies.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And again, I think we need to do some other deep dives into some of these particular case studies, William. That's absolutely fascinating. I want to wind you down now because we got really excited with all this stuff. I think you've given us masses of information. You've shared so much, and I thank you for that. I want to ask you, what's a couple of books I should be reading tonight when I try and unwind from all the information that you've given me to process? What's a good read for this topic of why transform?
Yeah, so there's a couple. The ones that are immediate, that are hot, I think that are worth seriously looking at. One is the book called Humanocracy by Gary Hamel. Okay, number one on my list, well-researched, well put together. And if you know Gary Hamel, he's been a provocateur for years, and he wrote some of the fundamental, books back in the 90s on competitive advantage and building capabilities as a form of, core competence and so forth. And he is seeing now the radical shift that is required. And this is coming from a guy who's seen a lot more than I have, simply because of his access and what he's been doing over the years. So Humanocracy would be another one. And another one is The Age of Agile, and I think written by Steve Denning. Okay. These are really important books, I think, that are current, that will allow you to really have an honest discussion with yourself about, am I current? Am I really understanding the shifts that are going on underneath us? And are we truly understanding what's going on with the workforce today? And again, with COVID and working from home, it's thrown the issue up into our face again. We really have to deal with this. So I think with those two books, I think you'll have more questions that'll come up, but they do provide a very provocative dialogue on where are we today and where do we need to go looking into the future.
Well, I love those two books, and both the authors are kind of like the Rolling Stones of transformation, aren't they? From 40 years ago or 30 years ago, I can't remember when, but they're both rock stars. I've seen both the books. They're really brilliant. Of course, your book I read whenever I can't sleep, William. It's fantastic. Executing Strategy. So it's always excellent to read that too. So I think you've given us all the pieces. I think we started off with that Peter Drucker quote about, not using yesterday's logic. So I think you've got the cogs in my brain turning. It's been an excellent session. I'm going to see you again very soon for another one. But thank you, William. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Haig, for the opportunity again. And may all things come to you at the right time, and all the people that are listening in. Best of fortune.
Thank you, William.